Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on healthy relationships featuring our very own educator, Anna Beatty. We're super excited for this one today. This webinar today is part of our celebration of National Adolescent Health Month. So we're excited for that. But May is also National Foster Care Month. So we've been celebrating that here at the office as well. We've been really busy and a lot going on. Again, thank you guys for joining us, and I'm just going to get our intro started. Maybe. There we go. All right, so just real quick, we'll go over who Mission West Virginia is, what our programs are, and then we'll get started with our presentation. So Mission West Virginia is leading a statewide effort to promote positive futures for all kids in West Virginia. We work alongside families as they navigate West Virginia's foster care system and provide evidence-based life skills education to help teens envision and create positive futures. As a result of our work, putting kids first in collaboration with social services, school districts, private foster care agencies, and other nonprofits, the future looks brighter for West Virginia. So we're doing this through two programs. The first one we'll talk about is Frameworks. So Frameworks provides support for those interested in foster care or kinship care to understand the system, find a placement agency, and prepare to make a meaningful difference in the life of a child. If you're interested in fostering, again, happy National Foster Care Month. Give us a call here at the office and someone can answer your questions and help you get started. You can call 866-CALL-NWV or 304-512-0555. Or you can request an information packet on our website, which is missionwv.org, /request type of information if you want the full link. So we also have the THINK program, which stands for Teaching Health Instead of Nagging Kids. And THINK empowers teens to make positive life choices through education, life skills, and coaching. Our program is evidence-based and helps the students we work with navigate the social emotional pressures all teens face as they develop. This includes building healthy relationships and healthy choices around drugs and alcohol and pregnancy prevention. We deliver our program in partnership with schools in 20 counties. We are vetted by district leaders, teachers, and other school leaders who are trained to work with kids. The program's evidence-based curriculum has been shown to have a positive effect on preventing teen pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, or sexual risk behaviors. Our educators are continually trained on the most up-to-date information on trauma, sexual health, and high-risk behavior. Our management team does on-site observations of our educators regularly to ensure fidelity is being followed. We also administer pre- and post surveys, receive teacher feedback, hold team focus groups, and site satisfaction surveys. On top of all of that, we also host workshops and trainings like the one you're with today. So we know it takes a whole community to help teens envision and create positive futures. This is why we also provide resources and training to equip parents, families, and the individuals who support kids as they navigate their teen years. So some of our workshops and trainings include talking to youth about sensitive or hard topics, hidden in plain sight, trauma, sexual assault prevention and consent, teen dating violence, and we have a whole list more. Today's webinar will offer social work CEUs, 1.5 contact hours. The social work provider number is 499999. And we will be sending out certificates. If not this week, then definitely by next week. If you have any questions, you can email Becky at rwhite@missionwv.org. All right, let's meet our speaker. We're super excited to have Anna present for us. She does a great job in the classroom. So Anna's been a THINK educator serving our students, is it for 3 years? She has a bachelor's in education from Marshall University. Sorry, my screen is lost on your bio. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Education from Marshall University. Outside of her work at Mission West Virginia, Anna is the director of a nonprofit organization, Royal Family Kids, that serves students who are or have been in the foster care system. Anna has several years of experience with TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, and has completed and provided many trainings on overcoming childhood trauma, communication skills, and building relationships. Anna serves as the vice president of the Auburn Arts Center Board and as a wife and a mother and enjoys playing with her son, acting, crafting, and reading in her free time. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right.
As soon as I can stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you, Hillary. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Awesome. Let you get that.
My screen just glitched. I'm sorry.
No, you're totally fine.
There it is.
All right, perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Hillary, for the introduction and getting things started for us. As she said, my name is Anna. This is my third year educating with Mission West Virginia. So I'm super excited to be able to with you guys today. A little bit different than what I'm used to, which is talking to high school students. But I think that this topic and the importance of healthy relationships is applicable no matter your age. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started with our presentation today. So our presentation is going to be on healthy relationships. Hopefully my goal today is to talk to you guys about how to set boundaries and stay safe in all your relationships and maybe bring awareness to what you might not be realizing is happening within some of your own relationships or relationships of those that you know. So on today's agenda, we are going to be talking about the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships. I know that might seem like an obvious thing to some people, but sometimes it is difficult to define the difference between the two. We're going to talk about red flags. We're going to define what that means. And we're also going to talk about different indicators of what red flags could be. We're going to do something called glitter brain, which you may or may not have heard of before. It's one of my favorite things to share with the high school students because I feel like it's the one thing that clicks with them for years to come. So I'll have students, 3 years later now that's what they remember the most is glitter brain. So I'm going to do that with you guys today. We're going to talk about relationship violence and the risk factors. So I'm going to go through the different types of relationship violence and what sort of individuals or circumstances may be at a higher risk for that. We're also going to talk about setting boundaries in relationships. So if you do feel like it's an unhealthy relationship or you know someone who is in one, we can talk about what boundaries look like in those types of relationships. And then I'm going to give you some resources. And at the end, if there are any questions that anyone has, then I will do my best to answer those as well. So let's go ahead and get started with 3 questions that we can ask ourselves as individuals who are in relationships. And I know that when we say the term relationships, oftentimes we think romantic, right? That's kind of like the first thought that pops in our head. But we have a lot of different relationships in our lives. Relationships can be romantic. They can also be friendships. They can be family relationships. You have relationships with the people that live in your home or are in your family. If you work, then you have work relationships with the people that you spend time with on a day-to-day basis. So relationships, that word does not just apply to romantic relationships. So I always tell my students this: if you're not in a romantic relationship, please do not tune me out and think, oh, this doesn't apply to me, because it absolutely does. It does, because our entire lives are made up of relationships with other people. And it is shocking to me that we don't spend more time focusing on how to have healthy relationships from a young age, because it is like one of the number one things that our world revolves around as we, spend time with others. So relationships are important. So the 3 questions we want to sort of ask ourselves at a foundational level in our relationships. Number 1, is it conditional or unconditional? So let's break that down a little bit. Conditional means that there are terms and conditions, right? So when you download an app, on your phone, it's going to say, do you agree to these terms and conditions? Which means there's sort of a, this is going to happen if this sort of situation. So a conditional relationship was look like, well, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, right? And so we see that a lot, especially in younger relationships, is that it's sort of based on what you can get out of the relationship. An unconditional relationship, when we think about that word unconditional, it means no matter what. So you would love someone no matter what. This is ideally the love or the definition that we would give of a parent caring for a child, right? You love them unconditionally. Now, I don't want to confuse people by saying that a healthy relationship should have unconditional love because sometimes people hear that and they think, well, if someone is abusing me, then I have to stay with them because healthy relationships have unconditional love. No, right? That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that you are willing to be with that person, care for that person, like people say in their wedding vows, in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor, that is unconditional love. It's not if someone is treating you poorly that you just choose to ignore it. That's not what it is. So in this case, a conditional relationship could be an indicator of an unhealthy relationship, while an unconditional relationship could be an indicator of a healthy relationship. Question number two, is it controlling or is it equal and supportive? So a controlling relationship can look like someone having a lot of input on where you go, what you do, who you're talking to, maybe even what you wear, where you spend your time. Those sort of questions that it almost seems nagging in a sense of they need to know what you're doing and sort of have their thumb on the whole relationship. An equal and supportive relationship would be like, let's say you have two different hobbies, yet you are able to encourage one another in that hobby, support one another in what they're doing, even if you know nothing about it. You are still encouraging the other person in what they love to do. This is also seeing each other on the same level. We're not putting ourselves higher than the other person. We're not giving ourselves more authority than the other person. We are seeing them eye to eye. So a controlling relationship would be an indicator of an unhealthy situation. An equal and supportive relationship could be an indicator of a healthy relationship. Question number three, is the relationship based off of a surface level attraction or is there attraction on many levels? So what this means is sometimes people are in relationships because they like what they can get out of it, whether it be material things, whether it be affirmation, whether it be just company or even physical things that they can get out of it. But they're not really in the relationship because they truly, genuinely care about that person. So, in a healthy relationship, we would want to see a relationship that has an attraction, not just physically, but also based on who that person is, their attributes, their qualities, their characteristics, right? So, we don't just appreciate them for what they look like. While that's nice, we have a much deeper attraction to that person. So, again, a surface level relationship based on what you can get out of it, that could be an indicator of an unhealthy relationship, while a deeper, multi-leveled attraction could be an indicator of a healthy relationship. And notice I'm saying could be. I'm not saying most definitely it is, but it could be an indicator. So these are three very basic questions that we can kind of evaluate within our relationships to see whether maybe it's swinging more healthy or unhealthy. Okay, what is a red flag? So we hear this term, I feel like it's gotten more popular in the past several years, and there's even now trends going around involving red flags and all that sort of thing. But a red flag, in essence, is a concerning or problematic behavior. There's also a term going around right now called a beige flag that you might hear teenagers saying, and a beige flag is basically something that's like, well, that's interesting. That's weird. That poses some questions, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. A red flag doesn't necessarily mean that the person is being abusive or exhibiting relationship violence, but it does mean that they are exhibiting characteristics which could lead to more of an abusive, toxic situation. So red flags, there is a broad spectrum, and I can tell you that different people have different perspectives and ideas of what falls under the red flag category. When I teach my high school students, we have an activity with red flags, and they have a white flag, which is like, again, that beige flag, and they have a red flag. And I read them a situation, and they're supposed to throw up what flag they think that that situation applies to. And most of the time they have differing opinions on if it's a red flag or if it's a beige flag. So I can't really specifically define what each thing, if it's a red flag or not. But I am going to try to hopefully give you an indication of what red flags could be. And then it can differ depending on specific situations. So let's look at how red flags can present themselves in relationships. So we kind of have four different categories here that we focus on when it comes to red flag behaviors. So the first is manipulation. So manipulation is trying to get someone to do something by coercing them in essence, or saying things to make them change their mind or do whatever it is that you have in mind. So for instance, an example or a couple examples of a manipulating phrase could be, if you really loved me, you would do blank, right? That's sort of a terms and conditions relationship thing there. So if you really loved me, you would do this. So they're using the definition of love to try to manipulate the individual into doing what it is they want them to do. Another manipulating phrase that you might hear is, am I not enough for you? So that's putting that question or doubt into that other person's mind where they don't want to feel that way. So they'll just say yes to whatever it is. And I'm hopeful that by seeing some of these phrases, we can kind of put an exact instance in mind to what we mean by manipulation or gaslighting or whatever. So manipulation is a big one that we see. It's asking questions. It's bringing in that terms and conditions type of attitude into the conversation. And then we have gaslighting. So this is a big term right now too. And I've had people say, well, I don't know if I can define gaslighting, but I can tell you what it is when I see it, right? So gaslighting is making someone, it could be making someone feel like they are crazy or they don't know what they're talking about or that it's all their fault, that sort of thing. So here are some gaslighting phrases that we could be mindful of. That never happened. So maybe you're in an argument with somebody and you're bringing up a complaint that you have that's legitimate. And they just look at you like, well, that never happened. What are you talking about? Right. So immediately that throws up your defense of, well, I know that it did. I know that it did. And if this goes on long enough, then you do start to question yourself. Gaslighting can be very dangerous because at first we realize, well, that what they're saying isn't true. But then if it happens long enough, we start to kind of convince ourselves that maybe it didn't happen. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So that can be very dangerous. And it's one of the things that we want to try to catch early on as a red flag. Another phrase that could indicate gaslighting is you're overreacting. You always act like this, right? So it's kind of putting that back on the other person. And this is a defensive thing for the other person as well. Like if you are coming to them with a concern, they're also going to put up their wall of defense. And that might look like putting on a wall that's going to deflect whatever you have to say back to you, which is this is an example of you're overreacting. All right. That's deflecting it back to you. You always act like this. Now that's making you feel bad and being like, well, do I? So those are some gaslighting phrases we might see. Controlling phrases. So we talked a little bit a couple slides ago about what control could look like. So controlling who someone talks to, where they go, all that sort of thing. So some phrases could look like, who are you talking to? Now, if somebody says, who are you talking to? That doesn't mean that that's a red flag. What I mean is, if every time you pick up your phone to talk to someone, they're like, who are you texting? Who are you texting? Who are you talking to? That could be a red flag behavior. If they're always needing to know your conversations and what you're talking about, that sort of thing. Another example, if you don't do blank, then I will blank, right? So they're putting themselves in control of what you do. And again, that's a terms and conditions thing. If you don't do this, then I will do this. And it's threatening too. Um, and this can get significant enough to where it does involve physical or emotional threats, which can also be very dangerous. Another phrase, I don't want you wearing that. So maybe you get a new outfit or whatever it may be, and you're going to go out for a date and you come downstairs and they're like, well, I don't want you wearing that, right? Um, and sometimes, we need to evaluate like what the situation is. But if this is happening consistently, then it could be an indicator that there is some control happening. And then lastly, invalidating phrases. So this can be very similar to gaslighting, but it's basically making the other person feel as if they don't know what they're talking about, belittling them in a sense. And we all have a anger response, right? Anger is our protective factor. So what happens is when we feel like we're being attacked, whether it be with a complaint or whether it be with an argument that gets brought up, right? We instantly go into protective mode. And that could look like maybe we escalate the situation bigger than it needs to be. Maybe we withdraw and avoid the situation. We kind of shut down and don't want to talk about it at all. Maybe we start to use invalidating phrases or putting the other person down, again, as a deflective thing to kind of get the focus off of us. Um, and so there are different ways that we respond, but this can happen a lot, especially in those heated moments in relationships. So examples of this could be, trust me, I know what's best, right? So you're in a relationship, you're having a discussion with someone or an argument, and they're like, it's kind of like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I know what's best. You just need to trust me. And now this can be said in a nicer way too, but sometimes this can be if it's, over time or often enough. The second one, I don't know what your problem is. So this can kind of make you put your shield up of, well, I don't have a problem, but it's something that they can say when they have their guard up as well. And then you don't know what you're talking about. That's very invalidating, especially if you come to someone and you do, in fact, feel that you do know what you're talking about. Um, it makes you feel like you're not being heard and not being validated. So these four things, manipulating, gaslighting, controlling, and invalidating, these are red flags. These are things that if we hear them enough or if we see them in relationships, we can say, you know what, I think that that's a red flag, and that could be an indicator of more serious issues. So when we have these red flags, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here for a minute so I can show you what I mean by red flags. So I have this water bottle here, and I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a water bottle with a little bit of stuff. It's glittered down here at the bottom, and I have words written on the back of the bottle here. So this bottle is going to represent our normal brains. Now, when we are just going about daily life, um, our brains, they have hormones in them and they have chemicals in them, but they're not necessarily doing anything crazy, right? They're just sort of at a baseline. So that's what this bottle is showing right now. The glitter at the bottom is our baseline, and these words on the back are sort of our thoughts, things like that. So I want you to imagine, and maybe it's been a while since you've been in this sort of situation, but I want you to imagine that you are back in high school or college or somewhere where you're meeting people sort of for the first time. And what happens is, let's say you meet someone new and you really like this person. And And so you have a crush on this person and you want to talk to them, and it's been going on for a while. And then all of a sudden they come to you and they start talking to you. And they maybe ask you out on a date and you go on this date. And so I always like to give this example to my students because they are very easily able to tell me how they feel in that situation, which is butterflies, heart racing, maybe a little bit sweaty, maybe your cheeks are flushed. Maybe you are stumbling on your words and you don't know what you're saying, right? And so we experience all of these things in this moment of, oh my goodness, this other person may like me. This is a new relationship, that sort of thing. So when that happens, your brain goes from normal baseline to something very different. So the first thing that happens is that dopamine is released in our brain. So this is going to represent dopamine, and I'm going to pour some of this into my bottle here. So I've got dopamine. Your dopamine in your brain increases when you are attracted to someone and you're in the early stages of a relationship. If you don't know what dopamine is, it is sort of your happy hormone. And so it kind of is released when you are feeling overjoyed or you feeling like you have accomplished something. That is released in heavy amounts. Like if you think about video games, right? If you play a video game for a long time and you're not winning, and then you do, huge dopamine release. And that can create that addictive thing of like, well, I need to keep winning and feeling this thing. Dopamine and adrenaline typically go hand in hand too. So in our early stages of a relationship, we're attracted to somebody, we have that dopamine. Then we have norepinephrine and phenethylamine. So norepinephrine and phenethylamine, they kind of work together. These also elevate in the brain and they give you a feeling of excitement and joy. And like you need to accomplish all of your joys or all of your tasks. And so that might make you feel like your heart's racing. That might make you feel flushed and hot and all of those things. So we have dopamine has been increased now. Norepinephrine and phenethylamine have been increased. And then we also have oxytocin. And so oxytocin is known as our bonding hormone. So when someone has a baby and they're first born, they put that baby on their chest, right? And they are skin to skin. And when they are skin to skin, that is releasing oxytocin to bond the mother and the baby to one another. And so it works that way too, even as adults, right? You feel bonded to someone when oxytocin is released. So in your brain, again, in this moment of initial attraction and initial relationship to someone, we have a dopamine increase, phenethylamine, norepinephrine, oxytocin, and then we have one hormone that actually drops in your brain, and that's serotonin. Serotonin is a mood regulator. And interestingly enough, in individuals that have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, they also have really low levels of serotonin. So sort of what happens is your brain says, oh, that's not good. We're missing this hormone. We don't know what to do. And so it starts to try to look for things to bring the serotonin levels back up. So you start to maybe obsess or fixate or care a lot about a particular thing, which explains why in the early stages of a relationship, we kind of become fixated on another individual. We become obsessed with being around them and talking to them. It's because your brain is using them as a replacement for its lack of serotonin. So I have added those extra chemicals to my bottle now. I don't know how well you can see it, and I'm sorry if you can't see it super well, but remember, this was your brain at a dormant level, just baseline. When we enter into a new relationship and we are in that initial phase of relationship, our brain goes from looking like it did a minute ago to looking like this. Now, what we might notice initially is that it's beautiful. It's very pretty, right? There's glitter going everywhere. It's eye-catching. If you were to put a light on it, it would be like, wow, that is very pretty. But one of the main issues is is that I can no longer read the words that were written on the back of my bottle. I can no longer see clearly through the bottle. And so what happens is we are in these initial phases of a relationship. And instead of being able to see that person clearly, we are now seeing them through the lens of glitter brain. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that all of those hormones that are being released and serotonin lowering, but everything else is being increased, that sort of clouds our judgment. That makes it a little bit difficult for us to clearly see and understand what's going on in relationships, or with another person. And the thing is, we can't stop that from happening. We can't really help that. Um, it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. And so we might be missing some things in relationships. When glitter brain is at its height, and our brain looks like this. And what's funny about this is they have done MRIs of the brain, both when someone is more at a dormant level and then when they are shown images of some, like, the person that they are in a relationship with, or they're talking about the person they're in a relationship with. Your brain actually does light up in different ways than it did before. And so it's pretty much prettier in essence, just like how this bottle is prettier when it's in the glitter brain phase. And so what we might not be missing, and what you probably can't see, the words on the back of my bottle, are that the person is moody. Maybe they're irritable. Maybe they have a negative attitude about everything. Maybe they are controlling. Maybe you weren't seeing that before. You weren't noticing that, man, they really do have a strong opinion about everything that you do and you say. Maybe they're disrespectful, maybe not even to you, but maybe the people in your life, they're disrespectful to them. Um, Maybe it's in subtle ways. And again, that glitter, that those hormones are clouding our ability to be able to see that, right? You can't see the words on my bottle anymore like you could before, because all of those hormones and those feelings are in the way. Maybe you're simply not as attracted to them as you thought you were. This is helping you out a lot by seeing, feeling a particular way towards them. Maybe you don't have good communication. Maybe there's just nothing in common with this other person. And we didn't notice any of that because, again, our hormones are kind of telling us this story and this narrative that everything's pretty and great. Um, and so this is a really powerful illustration to kind of stick in your brain that it is a really cool feeling. It is a really awesome thing. But it is happening. And we need to sort of remind ourselves that we might be experiencing glitter brain. So I always ask my students, what's the average high school relationship? And when I say that, I mean like a good high school relationship. Like, how long does that last? And they're always like, about 6-ish months, which is interesting because it takes about anywhere from 3 to 9, usually around 6 months, for your brain to kind of go back to normal. And so what happens is that you're in this glitter brain infatuation. We could consider that infatuation. We're in that phase and everything's wonderful and amazing and they're the best person ever. And then about 6 months later, we suddenly don't really care for them anymore. And we're kind of grossed out by the way that maybe they chew or they walk, or maybe we're just really annoyed and we start seeing that, like, man, they're not very nice, or we just don't have anything to talk about. Well, believe it or not, it's probably because all of those hormones have gone back to normal in your brain. And so now you're seeing that person sort of like everybody else is who wasn't affected by the hormones in your brain. And so now we see them for maybe some of the things that we were missing before. Another thing that can happen is, when you're in the beginning of a relationship, you're going to be, or you're going to try to be your best self. And so usually about 6 months into the relationship, we start to maybe show our true colors, and we start to exhibit characteristics that we were protecting the other person from before. So it's really a mixture of those two things. One, your hormones, kind of regulating, and two, the other person being more comfortable in showing, who they are. So what does this mean? This means that we need to save mature decisions for once we can be confident that we are seeing the other person clearly. And here in a minute, here in a few slides, we're going to talk about what a mature decision even is in the first place. But we need to understand that it's going to happen to our brains. And in 3 to 6 to 9 months, one of two things is going to happen. Either one, our glitter is going to settle and we're going to see that other person and they're going to be wonderful and fantastic and great. And we still want to be with them because they are an awesome person. Or two, our glitter is going to settle in our brain and we are going to see someone that we don't really care for. And we might start seeing red flag behaviors. Um, and so we need to understand that we might not have a full grasp on the relationship in the first little bit. And we need to give it time, one, for the glitter to settle, and two, for those decisions to be made before we do anything that we would then later say, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Because we've all done that in relationships. Said, no, I wish I wouldn't have said that or done that or thought this way. But give yourself a little bit of grace because no one is exempt from glitter brain. We're all going to have this at some point, and enjoy it, but also understand that it is changing the way that we perceive things. So red flags they seem obvious. I told you all those phrases a little bit ago. So why did they go unnoticed? Well, now you know. They go unnoticed because of glitter brain. And a lot of times, we see this so, especially in high school, I see this so often where someone's in a relationship and all of their friends and family are like, I don't know what you see in him or her. I don't know. They just don't seem very kind. They don't seem like they care about you, whatever it is. All these other people are saying that, right? And the individual that's in the relationship is like, well, those people don't know what they're talking about, or they're jealous or whatever it is because they have glitter brain, right? And everybody else in their life doesn't. And so they're able to read those words and see that the person is moody or disrespectful or whatever it is, but they're just not there yet. The other person is in the relationship that's not there yet. So we kind of have to give them the time to notice those things that might go unnoticed in the beginning. But if there's ever a situation where someone in your life you feel is in an unhealthy relationship and the person that they are with is exhibiting a lot of red flags, I would encourage you to say something because it very much could be that they are not seeing some things that could be potentially very dangerous. And so if we're aware that it's happening, it is best to say something before maybe the situation gets more serious than it tends to. So this sort of brings me to talking about relationship violence. So we talked about red flags, which again is not necessarily relationship violence, but it can be an indicator that the relationship is unhealthy. But with relationship violence, we know the relationship is unhealthy, and there are different types of relationship violence. So this definition is from Penn Violence Prevention. And this is a definition of relationship violence, which states a pattern of abuse committed by a person, past or present, involved in a social, sexual, or romantic relationship with another person. Relationship abuse can look like a variety of things, also known as domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So it is important to understand that there are different levels of relationship violence. I did just see a question that says, does glitter brain occur when someone is angry? Yes, but it looks different. So instead of having all those feel-good hormones released, it's sort of the opposite. But what happens is we do have those influx of hormones, and that is clouding our ability to see the situation clearly. So what happens is maybe we we're really angry, we're in a discussion with someone or an argument, and then we step away, and later we're like, man, I just wasn't understanding what they were saying, or I wasn't hearing them clearly, because we have that clarity of our hormones settling down. So it does happen, just in a different way. I just wanted to address that before we moved on from glitter brain. But so relationship violence, we have a few different types we're going to talk about today. The first is physical relationship violence. Now, this one is usually pretty obvious because, it involves something physical, but it's any intentional use of physical force with the intent to cause harm, fear, or injury, such as hitting, shoving, slapping, kicking, biting, using a weapon, etc. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced physical violence. So I hope that you're seeing that that is a much closer statistic than we often realize. Many times we put we assume that all victims are women, but that is not true. It is not, I mean, it's majority, but there's a very high number there of men as well. So physical violence, again, it can look like many different things, but that is with the intent to cause someone fear, or even threatening them, their harm and injury and things like that. So physical relationship violence is a big deal amongst all groups and people. One that typically goes maybe even unnoticed even more often, is verbal relationship violence, right? Because a lot of times this is happening behind closed doors, or it's not as obvious at times. So verbal relationship violence is any non-physical harmful behavior, such as a threat, name calling, intimidation, invalidation, stalking, harassing, etc. And so we may not think that stalking or harassing is verbal relationship or even relationship violence, but it most definitely is. Nearly half, so 48% of all women and men experience some form of verbal relationship violence in their lifetime. That is a wild, alarming statistic that many people would experience it in their lifetime. And then 95% of physical abusers are also emotionally abusive. So we rarely see physical relationships without the verbal. So verbal relationship violence, it can look like a lot of different things. And those red flags that we mentioned earlier and those examples that I gave you, those can be examples, right, of verbal relationship violence, especially if we see it over time. And so I feel like in this sort of situation, a lot of times we invalidate ourselves. Individuals who experience this sort of relationship violence often feel like maybe it doesn't count or whatever it may be because it's not physical. But physical is most definitely not the only type of relationship violence. And verbal relationship violence can be very detrimental over time. So it is just as important to understand and realize as physical. Let's see. We also have sexual relationship violence. This is any behavior that pressures, forces, or coerces someone to do something sexually that they did not or cannot give consent to. Sexual violence can include unwanted touching, rape, or even controlling reproductive choices. What's important to notice here is something they did not or cannot give consent to. Oftentimes we just hear that they did not give consent to, but if they are unable to give consent to, then that would be considered sexual relationship violence. So consent is a very important thing. It's something that I feel like everybody needs to understand what it is and what it is not. So consent must be freely given. That means that you have to not be coerced or manipulated into giving your consent. It needs to be um, given out of your own free choice and ability. It needs to be informed. So that means that you know exactly what it is that you are giving consent to. Sometimes we kind of bounce around the question or the intention, and we might say yes to something, and then later on it's like, well, that's not what I thought was going to happen, right? So we want to make sure that we are asking all the right questions, so that we feel that we have the information we need to then say yes or no. And that's really with anything in life, not just in a sexual relationship instance. Um, so it needs to be freely given, informed. It also needs to be with someone of the right age, meaning that you are similar in age to one another. The age of consent is different in different states, but for us in West Virginia, you do have to be 16 legally to give consent. And so we need to make sure that we are aware of that. And then lastly, we need to not be under the influence of any kind. Because we know that being under the influence alters our brain and our judgments. And so we also need to be mentally able to consent. Um, it also needs to be enthusiastic. You know, if you, let's just say, I had a bag of Jolly Ranchers, right? And you wanted a Jolly Rancher and you were like, can I have one? And if I said, yeah, I guess, that's not very enthusiastic or confident, right? So, in all situations with consent, we want to make sure that it is given with an actual yes, not just like we feel like we should say yes. So, with sexual relationship violence, most victims actually know their perpetrator. I feel like movies and TV shows kind of make it out to be some perpetrator that no one knows, and you just kind of jumped out of, an alley or whatever. But that's really not how it works. Most people know that person and usually know them pretty deeply. 9 out of every 10 victims are female. So unfortunately, with sexual relationship violence, the majority are female, but that does not mean that it is that victims are not males. What is often happening is that male sexual violence goes unreported. And so we have far more females actually reporting because they feel safer to do so oftentimes than males. And then the majority of assaults occur at or near the victim's home. I think it's within a 2 mile radius is where most often these assaults occur. And you'll notice in my little circle sort of chart over here that sexual violence is a continuum. So it's not limited to one thing. It's not just rape, right? It can look like um, online harassment. It can look like trafficking. It could look like stalking or sharing intimate things without one's permission. It could look like um, harassment of all different kinds, right? So it's not just one thing, it is many different things. So that is sexual relationship violence. And then we have stalking. And a lot of times when we're talking with our students about this, they're like, stalking. Yeah, stalking can very much be an example or a type of relationship violence. There is a TV show on Netflix called You, and it is very much a big example of what stalking would look like in a relationship. So this is when someone makes you feel unsafe by watching, following, or harassing you. This can look like unwanted attention or contact or seeking out personal information. So if someone is always trying to get your attention, if someone is seeming to be everywhere that you are, maybe constantly in contact with you, um, constantly trying to be around you or near you, that could be an indicator of a stalking situation. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have been a victim of stalking in their lifetime. So this could happen on social media. I would say that that's the number one instance where we're going to see it. And oftentimes we will see individuals creating fake accounts in order to um, stalk another person because I don't really want to know that, want others to know that it's them. And so we'll see fake accounts on social media. And then it can also look like it can also take place in person too. We have an example that we talk about with our students of like there's a relationship where it initially starts off with just excessive texting. And then it's like they want to know their location. And then it's like, well, they drive past their house every day, right? And so by that point, the students are always able to identify this is not a safe situation. So we want to be aware that this can happen, and the statistics are actually somewhat high for it. Then we have power and control. Now, this is one of the most common types of relationship violence that we see. And it is one of the main ones that goes unreported or unnoticed simply because of the nature of what power and control looks like. So, in this type of relationship, it involves one person trying to control the other person or to dominate the relationship. So this could include financial control. This could include control of where someone goes. Again, a lot of these things we've mentioned earlier already in our discussion of what someone is doing or who they're talking to or what they're wearing or what they're spending money on, that sort of thing. Now there is a word for this type of relationship violence called intimate terrorism. And I know that sounds really harsh, but when we really look at the definition of this and how it oftentimes happens over time for an extended period of time, then that title and that phrasing starts to make a little bit more sense. So really with this one, this is what happens in those long-term relationships where maybe it's been going on for a long time. And oftentimes this happens slowly. It's not like all at once. I always tell my students, you don't go on a first date with somebody and then give them your house key on the same day, right? We don't do that. So these sort of things are not going to show themselves right off the bat. So it could take place over many years. There's another TV show called Maid, like Housemaid, Maid. And it is a really good example of what this could look like. So in that example, um, it's a relationship between two individuals, and initially, um, the male in the relationship, he says, "Well, you know what? You don't really need a car. You don't need your own car because we go everywhere together and you don't have a job, so it's not like you need to go anywhere, when I'm not home. So let's sell your car. It'll give us a little extra money and then we'll just share the one car." Okay. That's not so bad, right? Because I know several people that have one car. Okay, so that's not really an issue. And then sometime later, he's like, "You know what? You don't need a credit card either because we're always together again. I mean, we have the same car and everything. So if you need something, you just let me know and I'll buy it." Maybe that raises a little bit more of a red flag or a question mark. And then a little bit more time goes by and he says, actually, you don't need a phone because we have the same friends. So anybody you would want to talk to, like you can talk to them on my phone, and you don't really go anywhere without me. So why would you need a phone, right? So now we're starting to understand that there is more happening here than just saving money by having one vehicle. And so eventually what happens is he starts to maybe throw things at her to intimidate her or cause her harm. And when she does go to get help, they give her information about a domestic violence shelter. And she says, "Well, I don't need this because I'm not experiencing domestic violence." And they're kind of like, "Well, you don't think so?" And she's like, "No." Because she wasn't being like physically abused. So, like I said in the beginning of these different types of relationship violence, that is not the only one that is significant, right? And so all of these things are considered relationship violence. And they are all detrimental in different ways. And sometimes they are happening side by side with one another. So, power and control is one that, again, often goes unnoticed because it is happening intimately within relationships, usually not out in public in front of everybody else. And you'll notice the image I have here, it's kind of like a puppeteer. And so when we think about, a puppet being its every move is controlled, and that's sort of how power and control works, is that the other individual wants to have as much control and say so and power in the relationship as possible, which can be very dangerous. So considering we talk a lot with teens, and many of you on the webinar today probably work with teenagers, I did want to touch a little bit more specifically on teen dating violence. So sometimes I know, like for me, when I first started researching and thinking about relationship violence and dating violence, my mind never went to teenagers, right? You think of adults. That is not the case. Teen dating violence is very much happening. Violence does not just take place in adult relationships. And many times, teen dating violence is overlooked or made excuses for or not reported. And when I ask my teens, why do you think that violence amongst your age group goes unreported? And they will say things like, well, we wouldn't know who to tell. That's a problem, right? They wouldn't know who to tell. So we try to get them the resources and make them aware of the individuals in their life that they could tell. We would hope that they would feel comfortable telling a guardian, but that's not always the case. But the first problem is they don't know who to tell. The second thing that they say is, well, that's embarrassing, right? They don't want other people to know what they are experiencing. They don't want to be seen in that light. And so I feel like as adults in this field of working with teenagers, we can do a better job at supporting them and encouraging them. The third thing they say is, well, nobody's going to believe me. That's a problem too, right? They have this idea that no one is going to believe that what they say is true. And that's the hard part with dating violence. Oftentimes, it is two people saying what they believe or saying what they want people to believe, and it's hard to know what the truth is in that situation. But we do need to do a better job at coming alongside of these individuals, specifically teenagers, and assisting them in whatever they need. And I always tell them, if you decide to tell somebody what you're experiencing, an adult, and that adult does not believe you, tell somebody else until you get help. Don't be discouraged in that sense. No one's going to believe you. So that's the third thing. No one's going to believe us. Those are really the main three things that I hear them say. That they would be embarrassed, they don't know who to tell, and they're afraid that no one would believe them. They sometimes say things like, well, I'm afraid of what the other person would do if I were to tell. Um, and I try to encourage them that, the best thing that they can do is to tell someone and get help. So understand that teen dating violence is happening, and many teens, they feel like they don't have an outlet, or they wouldn't know what to say or who to tell if they were experiencing this. The CDC states that about 1 in 12 high school students experienced physical or sexual dating violence in the past 12 months. So that's still pretty high in my opinion, and I actually believe that that statistic is probably higher than that, simply because of all the things that I just mentioned of teenagers not reporting, not knowing how to report or who to report to, and that fear that they have of, I'm only 15 years old. I don't know what to say or what to do, and if someone doesn't believe me, it could create this whole thing, right? So I would even go to say that statistic could be higher than 1 in 12 high school students. Um, when I was researching specifically teen dating violence, um, it was interesting to me that students who were part of the LGBTQ plus community were at a higher risk of dating violence. We actually saw the numbers in that community being higher than 1 in 12. So that is a super important thing to be aware of and pay attention to when we're working with our teenagers. Another group of students that were at higher risk are female students. And then students who have experienced childhood trauma. So students who are coming, to school with these backgrounds of baggage and hurt are more often ending up in teen dating violence situations. And a lot of times this is because they have seen this behavior at those foundational ages. And so it is not as concerning to them when they see it again. And so there's more excuses that are made, or more free passes that are given in those relationships, which then can lead to more harmful behaviors. So when you're working with your teenagers, be aware that this is happening even in high school students, specifically some of those from a harder background, female students, or those that are a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So let's talk about some more risk factors. When we say risk factor, this is something that could put an individual at a higher risk for experiencing relationship violence. And this doesn't just mean adults, and it doesn't just mean high school students. In general, these things could put an individual at higher risk. So the first thing is individuals from a low socioeconomic status are often at a higher risk for relationship violence. When you think about this, if you are in a low income situation, you're probably very, very stressed, right? About food, about finances, about paying rent, about buying gas, right? It is a very heightened level of stress in those situations. And so when we are feeling stressed, it becomes much more possible to exhibit some of those red flag behaviors and then to end up in a very unhealthy relationship because we are not able to control our environment. And so therefore, then we try to control others. And that's a human thing. So low income can be a risk factor. History of trauma. So if you have experienced trauma, growing up, especially in those foundational years, then there's two things that can happen. And one I already mentioned, which is you start to excuse or give a free pass to those behaviors when you see them again. The other is that, unfortunately, sometimes we repeat those behaviors that we are taught as a child. And so when our brain is developing, I'm going to use my fist here if you can see it as an example of what your brain looks like. My thumb is going to represent my amygdala, and my thumb down is the lower part of your brain. And then my fingers are going to be the prefrontal cortex. So when I put that over my thumb here, we have our full brain. When we are an infant, this is even in the womb, in these first foundational years, the bottom half of our brain develops first. So what happens is if we experience any sort of trauma, which can look different for everybody, that can cause our amygdala and the lower part of our brain to sort of overdevelop. So then we call that our downstairs brain. We have a really big basement and a smaller upstairs, right? And the upstairs part of the brain takes up to 25 years old to finish developing. So we think our lower half of our brain is overdeveloped, and that is responsible, that part of your brain is responsible for fight or flight, your impulses, right? And unfortunately, our brain cannot tell the difference between physical danger and emotional danger. It sees them both as danger. And so when we are in a relationship with someone, and let's say that we're in an argument with them, or a discussion comes up that's heated, our brain can see that as physical danger. And so then our amygdala goes in charge and it sort of flips the lid. And so what that means is instead of processing and thinking through the situation like you would with your prefrontal cortex if it was in control, your amygdala kicks in and says, nope, we're in danger. We're going to go fight, flight, freeze. We're going to go off impulse, right? And so, if we have a history of trauma, we can be more likely to do that, meaning in our relationships with others, instead of being able to process and plan and see things clearly, we kind of go into that downstairs brain, which can be detrimental in certain instances. Insecurity and low self-esteem, they play a big part in how we respond and how we see ourselves and others. So those with really low self-esteem are at a higher risk factor for both being victims and perpetrators. Actually, we talk about this with bullying in the middle school students. Bullies often, they either have really low self-esteem or really high self-esteem. It's typically one or the other. So we can often see this and similarly with relationship violence. Young age, like I just mentioned, your brain doesn't finish developing until you're 25. So really even beyond that, but up until that point, we might not be able to fully judge and discern and determine situations and safety situations like we would later on in life. So oftentimes we see young individuals becoming victims because their brain is simply not able to fully process through what could be dangerous and what could not. Poor behavior and impulse control. So if we have poor impulse control, meaning that we just sort of make decisions, we don't think them through, then that could put us at a higher risk for relationship violence. We also see depression and anxiety. Those who suffer with those two things could be at a higher risk for both being a victim and a perpetrator. We already have so much going on in our brains that our relationships take the fall for that. Alcohol and drug use is a big one, especially in this area. We have high levels of alcohol and drug use, and so we can see that becoming more of a factor with relationship violence. A lack of a support system. If someone is in a relationship and they don't have anybody in their life that they can go to if they need help or if they feel like they're in danger, then they are at a higher risk for relationship violence because they don't have those people backing them up or they don't have those people checking on them or those people that they could confide in. And then differing beliefs or morals. So this just sort of means if you have two people in a relationship and they have wildly different beliefs, that can be a big indicator that could lead to relationship violence because people care deeply about what they believe and what they value. And so if those are very different with two individuals, it can create a lot of communication issues and those things can escalate. So the things that you see on this chart, these are all things to keep in mind that could put us at a higher risk for experiencing relationship violence. So on the flip side here, let's think about protective factors. So these things are what we could ensure to help keep us safe from experiencing relationship violence or from experiencing some of these red flag behaviors that we've talked about. So on the last chart, I mentioned having no support system being a risk factor. And on the flip side, having a strong support system can be a protective factor. So when we think about protective factors, this is something that is going to ensure our safety, right? So if you have people that are checking in on you, that have your best interest in mind, that are actively involved in your life, that are going to give you the support and resources that you need, then that can serve as a protective factor in an unhealthy relationship. Maybe they are able to identify that you're in an unhealthy relationship when you are experiencing glitter rain before you can. And so maybe, like I mentioned earlier, they can step in and say, hey, I'm noticing some things that might not be very healthy. And can I help you with that? So having a strong support system can be very helpful. And then we have being in a safe community and environment. So, one of the risk factors was low income, which often means that the housing situation could be in a more dangerous environment. So, on the flip side, again, if we live in a safe community and a safe environment, that can be a protective factor. Having a stable income, right? Low income was a risk factor. Having a stable income where we're not stressed about where our next meal is going to come from, where we're not stressed about paying the bills, that can be a protective factor as well. Therapy and counseling services. This is a big one. Um, Having someone, and unfortunately, healthcare and therapy and those sort of things are expensive. And I totally recognize that and understand it. But having someone, a professional, that you can talk to, or even if your relationship is sort of teetering on that line between healthy and unhealthy, that you can go to together can be a make or break experience. And I know some people shy away from therapy because they think that that is admitting that there's something wrong. But guess what? I think we could all benefit from it in some area of our lives. And so it's always good to sort of seek that out if you feel that it could be helpful in your specific situation. Communication and healthy relationship classes. So this is one thing that Mission West Virginia is trying to do from the start as like a preventative thing, right? So myself included, we go into high schools and middle schools all across the state, and we give healthy relationship classes. I get to talk to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 year olds about their relationships and about having good communication and what that looks like and how to argue effectively and what red flags are, right? So if we get this information at a foundational level, middle school, high school, then that can serve as a protective factor then and later on in life. I never had anything like this in high school, and I think that is so beneficial. And I can't tell you how many students have come to me and said, I didn't realize I was in an unhealthy relationship until you were able to talk to us. And so that just makes my heart happy because if we can kind of get ahead of it, then we are better off. When you know better, you do better, and having better communication skills is helpful. Now, I always tell my students this too. Having good communication and good communication skills is not going to solve any violence, right? Or abusive situations. However, having good communication from the start can be a preventative thing from ending up in that sort of situation. And then lastly, positive relationships with influential adults. This is especially true with teenagers if they have that at least one person that is an adult, that is a positive influence on them, then that is going to go so far. Not only do they have someone that they feel like they can confide in, a trusted adult, but also they're learning and they're growing from an individual that has already experienced it. And even as adults, I think it is essential that we have a positive relationship with somebody, another adult in our life that can kind of serve as a protective factor in our own lives and be there as, a voice of reason or advice, or help whenever we may need it. So these things are things that could serve as a preventative measure against relationship violence or as a protective factor in those situations. So this pyramid is something that we do with our students. And this is what we kind of look like when we want to build a healthy relationship. So sort of going off of those protective factors, these are things, or this is a way that we can build our relationships from the ground up to sort of maybe act as a preventative thing against relationship violence. So you'll notice there's 3 different levels: positive starters, deepening and developing, and mature love. So we want to build our relationship in this manner. So with positive starters, this might look like getting to know one another. This might look like going on dates, getting to know each other's common interests and hobbies, and actually showing interest in those and learning more about them. Then we move up to deepening and developing. This would look like maybe meeting each other's families. Maybe it would look like starting to trust that person, be honest with them, practice good communication, right? Then we enter into the mature love phase. This is when we would consider a relationship to be more serious. We definitely have that trust and commitment involved. And defining what mature love looks like is different, but we know that it's not infatuation. So when I reference back to this glitter brain, right? I mentioned briefly that this would be infatuation. And so sometimes when we're in glitter brain, we are making decisions that should be saved for the mature love portion of our relationship whenever glitter brain is happening in the positive starters. And so that can sometimes cause our pyramids to sort of flip upside down. And if we think about an actual pyramid, it would be very hard for it to stand on that very fragile tip because relationships, um, they are meant to be built with a strong foundation. If we were to flip this triangle upside down and it was like a real life, structure, it would crack and crumble because we are trying to put too much weight and too much investment into something that's very, very small and fragile. So when we are building our relationships, and again, I know this sort of applies more to romantic relationships, but when we're building our relationships with individuals, we want to try to build them with a strong foundation, with getting to know one another, with sharing common interests and building our ability to communicate with the other person before we make any serious decisions, before we give them our house key. Sometimes before we introduce any sort of physical activity into the relationship because we want to make sure that those hormones are leveled, that we see the other person clearly before we make serious decisions that would belong in the mature love section. So, real quick, let's talk about boundaries. So, boundaries are like guardrails. When you're driving on the road, there's a guardrail. That guardrail is there to protect you from getting hurt. It would not be smart to drive against the guardrail because while you might not get hurt, your vehicle is going to get damaged. And so, when we think about relationships that way, we can set boundaries in our relationships to protect ourselves and others from getting hurt. It wouldn't be very smart to kind of walk along the line of that boundary because while we might not end up in a detrimental situation, we can still end up getting hurt. So boundaries are there to sort of help us evaluate and control our relationships in the sense that we are protecting ourselves and others. So boundaries can be physical, emotional. They can involve your finances. They can involve your time. And boundaries are important not just in romantic relationships, but a lot of relationships. So boundaries can help you set expectations with another person. They can help you to empower yourself, ensure comfort and safety, define the responsibilities within a relationship. Sometimes that gets kind of blurry, and then to reduce codependency as well. So, how to set boundaries? Boundaries are a process of moving gradually until you feel safe. So, first, you want to determine, in order to set a boundary, you need to determine what you want in the relationship. So, ask yourself some of these questions. What are my expectations? What are my standards of how I want to be treated? How do I want to spend my time, either with others, or how do I want to sort of make sure that I am being taken care of too? What's most important to me? What makes me feel safe and what makes me feel fulfilled? So you're asking yourself these interpersonal questions of what matters to me? What do I expect? How do I want to spend my time? Once we have sort of determined what we want in relationship, we can then assess the relationships that we have. Does the other person make me feel respected? Or do I feel sort of disrespected when I'm in their presence and when I am interacting with them? Do they do anything to make me feel unsafe physically or unsafe emotionally? Remember, your brain, physical danger, emotional danger, same thing. So when we want to ask ourselves these questions of Do we feel safe in all the areas? Do I feel pressured in any part of the relationship? Do I feel like this individual is trying to manipulate me or pressure me to do something that I'm not ready to do? Does the relationship feel controlling again, or does it feel equal? And can you have open communication? This is an important one because while we may be able to identify the things that we aren't happy about, we often come to a stop because we feel like we can't talk to that person about those things. So, can you have open communication? So we've determined what we want, we've assessed our relationships, and now we need to enforce our boundaries. So first we need to talk to the individual, and I know that's really, really hard for some of us that are non-confrontational to have this discussion, but growth is not going to happen. We're going to keep, if you go back to that car reference, we're going to keep paying for the damage to repair the damage on our car if we don't do this. Talk to the individual. Then, once we've informed them of what our boundaries are, that might involve physical, emotional, time, finances, whatever, then we want to give reminders of those. It might be a new thing that we have to kind of learn together. So we're giving reminders of that. We also want to have consequences for those things, right? If we don't have consequences, like if we knew we could drive into that guardrail and nothing would happen, then it wouldn't be as significant of a important of a guardrail, right? So we want to have consequences for what happens if those boundaries that we have communicated clearly are crossed. And then you only want to state the consequences that you feel comfortable enforcing. If you think to yourself, oh, I want to set this consequence, but I wouldn't actually do it, then don't say it out loud because then it might not, you might not be taken seriously over time. And then have check ins with yourself and the other person. Is this working for me? Most importantly, because these are my boundaries. And is it reasonable and feasible for the other person as well? So here are some resources that I hope would be helpful if you are experiencing relationship violence of any kind. First, we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and you guys can take a picture. I know, I believe Becky's going to send out the slides as well. That is their number. And then National Centers for Victims of a Crime. We have the National Dating Abuse Helpline, and then two websites that are really, really helpful when it comes to this content. It's breakthecycle.org and loveisrespect.org. These are super, there's quizzes, there's information, videos, podcasts, all of that. So if you have more information about, or more questions, or you want more information about this topic, these resources are a great place to go. And please, 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 if you or yourself or someone you know that you're close to is experiencing anything similar to what I've talked about in this presentation today, do seek out some resources or help because your safety is incredibly important. Locally here in West Virginia, we have the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, westvirginiacadv.org. You can get on there and see all of the places in West Virginia that can be of help in a violent situation. And then this information is also on the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Okay. So do we have any questions or anything like that? I don't think, I don't see any in the Q&A. Let's see.
Anna, we've had a couple people ask for an email. I have provided that in the chat log. However, I will send that out in my follow-up email as well. And request for the presentation that will be going out likely tomorrow, and a link to the recording will be going out as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And if anybody has questions, feel free to email me. I have really, really enjoyed getting to share this information with you guys today. I think it's a super important topic, and it's super important that we try to know better so that we can do better. And hopefully it brought some insight to you guys today.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's it if nobody else has any questions. And thank you, Anna.
Thank you. I
Appreciate you
appreciate
so
you
much.
guys. Always.